Spiritually awake people are quietly disappearing from society because Jung discovered something profound. When you become genuinely conscious, staying engaged with unconscious social patterns becomes psychologically unsustainable. But this withdrawal serves a specific purpose. It's temporary recharging that allows awakened individuals to return and offer authentic connection to those ready for deeper relationships. There's a mass exodus happening that most people don't recognize. The most psychologically developed individuals in your workplace, your social circles, your family, they're quietly stepping back, not from anger or superiority, but from what Jung called consciousness fatigue. Jung predicted this pattern over a century ago. He understood that psychological awakening creates what I call dimensional incompatibility. You're operating from a different level of awareness than the collective social environment. And maintaining that consciousness while surrounded by unconscious patterns requires enormous psychological energy. If you've been feeling the pull to withdraw, to need more solitude, to find social interaction draining in ways it never used to be, Jung would say you're not becoming antisocial. You're following an archetypal pattern that every individuating person must navigate. The consciousness burden. Why awakening creates isolation. Psychological development doesn't make life easier. It makes it more complex. When you begin seeing unconscious patterns operating in yourself and others, you can't unsee them. This creates what Jung's private journals describe as the weight of seeing. Picture yourself at a dinner party where everyone's having animated political discussions, but you've done enough inner work to recognize that most passionate political opinions are really psychological projections. People externalizing their internal conflicts onto social issues. You can see how each person's childhood wounds are shaping their worldview, how their unintegrated shadow determines their enemies. You're not judging them. You've been there yourself, but you can no longer participate in the unconscious drama because you see the underlying psychological dynamics at play. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But his personal correspondence reveals the profound loneliness this brings. You're awake in a room full of people talking in their sleep. Jung's own psychological crisis taught him this directly. As his consciousness expanded during his confrontation with the unconscious, normal social interaction became increasingly unbearable, not from arrogance, but from the sheer energetic effort required to bridge different levels of awareness. This explains why awakened people often describe feeling like aliens in their own social environments. They're speaking a different psychological language, seeing different dimensions of reality, operating from fundamentally different assumptions about what's real and what matters. Every conversation demands you pretend you don't see what you see, don't understand what's really happening beneath surface interactions. The translation effort becomes exhausting. The energy drain of unconscious environments. When you're conscious, you become what Jung's patient files describe as an unconscious material processor. You're no longer just managing your own psychological content. You're automatically picking up, filtering, and processing the unconscious projections, shadows, and emotional residue that others are leaking. Think about what happens energetically when a conscious person enters an unconscious space. Others' projected emotions feel like your own emotions. Shadow material people avoid in themselves becomes visible to you. Persona performances everyone maintains creates psychological static. Collective anxiety about unspoken topics saturates the environment. Jung termed this psychological contamination in his clinical notes. Your heightened sensitivity, which serves you well in conscious environments, becomes a liability in unconscious ones. Elena, a therapist who'd completed extensive shadow work, experienced mysterious exhaustion after team meetings. Through analysis, she realized she was unconsciously processing not just her own material, but the unspoken tensions, projections, and shadow dynamics of her entire team. She wasn't trying to fix anyone. Her consciousness had simply become so refined that unconscious material felt like psychological static she couldn't filter out. But there's another layer Jung's correspondence reveals. When you've touched your authentic self, performing social personas becomes genuinely painful. Before awakening, you could unconsciously play whatever role the situation required. After awakening, returning to persona performance creates what Jung privately called existential nausea. You're in board meetings pretending your corporate persona matters when you know it's just a mask. You're at family gatherings playing roles that stopped fitting years ago. You're maintaining friendships based on shared unconsciousness when you've outgrown the patterns that originally bonded you. This isn't about superiority, it's about psychological integrity. Your psyche simply won't let you betray your authentic development to maintain social comfort. Jung's journals reveal his own struggle. I can no longer pretend to be the proper Swiss psychiatrist when I have seen the depths that psychiatry refuses to acknowledge. The performance feels like death. Comment if you've experienced this exhaustion from environments requiring persona performance. I recognize the cost of psychological authenticity. The hermit phase, Jung's archetypal withdrawal. This withdrawal isn't pathological, it's archetypal. Every culture throughout history has recognized what Jung's anthropological research revealed as the hermit phase, a necessary stage of psychological and spiritual development. The hermit archetype appears universally because individuation requires periods of separation from collective influences. You can't integrate your shadow while others pressure you to maintain your nice persona. You can't discover your authentic voice while constantly adapting to others' expectations. Jung's own experience at Bollingen demonstrates this necessity. His years at the tower by the lake weren't vacation. They were psychological survival. He needed distance from collective consciousness to develop individual consciousness. He needed separation from others.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Webster Report on this Sunday, the 30th of November 2025. We've started off there with something I found earlier today, which I thought, well, we've got to start going deep. Now, that is all, that's all material stuff. There's not much spirituality in this, but we can see that Jung has found something that happens and occurs within social construct. What's missing, Alex? He's got a construct there that sticks on everything. And I know we're going a bit deep, but if we're going to get higher with this and bring things together, we've got to see what the psychological side of this warfare, as well as the spiritual.
Yeah. What's missing? Obviously, we know what's missing, because I think Jung ultimately diagnosed what was missing, even if he didn't know that he was doing that. He thought he was doing what was being spoken about there, excavating deep into the heart, minds, and unconscious of human beings. But ultimately, from my perspective, the church, instated and instituted by Jesus Christ, was, had a mission just like the Jews did, and has not perfectly reflected it. When that happens, the culture can become deranged. We know when we've spoken in the past about the divine order and how it was in Genesis in Eden, that's got turned upside down. When you look at all the operations that took place in the 1960s, with the feminist movement, the free love movement and everything, the attack on the family, it was a kind of an inversion of what the order traditionally was. And we lost a lot of functionality, which led to disintegration and ultimately degree of chaos particularly in Western societies. This is why countries like China, and no matter what we think about them in terms of the human rights record, within the culture, they try to preserve something of traditional values. And even though the West could portray them as oppressive, they would portray that these Western values, if they're an infection everywhere, and we might associate that with, say, the Babylonian system, the beast system, the harlot rides on its back, that's corrupted everything, where we become materialistic, we become concerned only with physically exterior things, possessions, acquisitiveness, luxury, money, and everyone's competing for that when there's a dwindling supply, or should we say, an increasing supply for the elites and less for the common people. So something in that system is wrong culturally as well as spiritually, so we might call it sick. And unfortunately, the church historically has contributed to that whenever it has refused in practice to be the light of the world and the salt of the earth. And, you know, it's got some great track record as the church, but some very poor track record. And ultimately, if the church's light becomes deranged, then who God is considered to be becomes deranged. And when the church acts out that derangement, and when the structures of the world enter into the church and subvert it, that's the satanic agenda, then the church fails in the mission that God called it to. And then what happens is the culture becomes depraved, and then we forget actually that God, first and foremost, as I've said several times, it isn't about just saving individuals eternally for eternal life. It's first and foremost about you now are able to return to a restored relationship with God that's reconciled, you know, and that ultimately now life can start this side of the line of death or heaven or whatever you want to call it. So the point is the relationship starts now, the restored relationship with your maker, which wouldn't have been possible apart from Jesus. Now, Young isn't going into that because he's not looking. He does look at the history of Christianity and the impact of the church, but his main focus is, like you said, Paul, to look at the internal psychological mechanics of people. But that's not just the psychology, because it's linked to the culture. It's linked to examples that were given right from the beginning. Parents, teachers, like you said many a time, when your parents teach you one way and they're wrong, it just gets passed down. So this corruption is very easily socialized through the generations, through bad parenting, bad social structures, increasingly corrupted. And Young is really looking and saying, when it comes down to it, when we start doing this kind of thing and we start reaping, you know, what we sow, we like to blame other people. We like to project our problems out onto others. It's their fault. It's this person's fault. It's this politician's fault. That doesn't mean that they don't do things that are wrong, but invariably we blame other people for what's really ours to deal with. So the Jungian position is very clearly take responsibility for your own inner conditions. And the Christian overlap there is, you know, there's only so far you can take that under your own strength. You might go to a counsellor, a therapist, an analyst like Jung. He might, you know, very skilled. If you were able to see Jung, he'd make great progress with you if he wasn't dead. But ultimately, there's still some good therapists, but that'll take you so far. And there is a spiritual component to psychological awakening. You know, the Apostle Paul, who was Saul of Tarsus, was radically transformed by a spiritual encounter. His mindset changed. The Greek word metanoia, repentance, means change of mind. So you have a change of mind, a change of heart, a radical change of direction. So there's definitely something where the psychological plays a part in that. I think Jung is identifying inadvertently this problem that the church's failures bequeathed to culture. And it kind of said, yeah, it's all about salvation in the next life. And the key is to be saved and have the right confession, the right faith, the right belief. Bob's your uncle and you're protected by Jesus. And there's an eternity thing going on. But what about now? What about how you're living now? And like I said before in the past, with the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament, when the Jewish people returned from Babylonian captivity to Jerusalem, yeah, they were back there, but the walls were still broken down, which is like your boundaries. So the book of Nehemiah is a very, very good metaphorical kind of parable for what the repair work we have to do when we return from exile, when we return, you know, from this alienated condition that we were in back into being grounded in our own territory, our own city, our own sovereignty. If the walls are broken down, it means people can come in and out. Your boundaries are weak. Boundaries are what Jung talks about. So it's that distinction between self and other. You've got to have your boundaries right. Not walls where you don't let anyone in, and not non-existent. So it's very, very important to see it all linked together, kind of psycho-spiritually. And that's what Jung brings to the table, because Christianity lost certain things within the culture. And if we take Jung seriously, it brings us back to saying the reckoning starts with me. Not blaming other people, but what a serpent did. Look at what happened at the beginning. Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent. I mean, I'm sure the serpent was blaming God. It's your fault. You shouldn't have given them free will. Anyone but me. It wasn't me. I only did it because I was under duress, or this person did that, or I was under stress and I had a bad day. Yeah, okay, fair enough. But are you making excuses? Most of us make excuses. Adam and Eve, after they sinned, went to hide in the trees. So what we've got to do is say, actually, I'm going to come up. I'm going to lay my hands out and say, okay, you got me. Now I need to have a reckoning with myself. I need to get my heart put right. And that's where Jung can't provide the answer. And that's ultimately where Jesus Christ, from our perspective, clearly is the answer.
Well, we can quite clearly see then, looking at how the society is being degraded and disjointed, if we've got that spiritual break as well, where people are finding themselves in these desperations, so they turn possibly to the church as, even the last resort type thing, and then they get to the church and they get people who are just nice people who may help them out, but they're not hearing the real message. They're not hearing that they've got to stop doing certain things. They've got, and I was, as we spoke earlier, that there's people going through some absolute hell, and there's nothing there. Having been there myself, when there's nothing there, you can't see anything that you could do outside. You can't see anything. You're taking all the responsibility, which is what Jung was talking about there. Take the responsibility for the consequences of your actions. But when things are happening to you that you don't seem to be able to do anything about, and everything seems to be pointed to you saying it's your fault, you start to believe that. If you've then not got that spiritual connection, you end up being cut off. Do you remember a long time ago we talked about we've got to have these boundaries and structures, no matter even if they're not good ones, because particularly within our head construct, if we haven't got those boundaries and we go off the reservation, you may never come back. That's frontal lobotomy time. If he's recognising it all those times ago, when we're in an era where the Tavistock Institute is understanding what psychological warfare is, where if we can put people in a sustained fight or flight mode constantly, that'll create it'll be easier to create cognitive dissonance between them, and the brain will not be able to differentiate a physical injury to mental trauma and duress. So the body gets traumatized, the mind gets traumatized, and you're programmed that this is life, and you're programmed into doing things that isn't good for you. And we were talking with Ray the other day about the Manchurian candidate, MK Ultra, and he said, "Oh, well, I've not had a look into that. It might be something I'll have to look into." Look at the subtlety of MK Ultra. We pay bills that we shouldn't do, and it's written right there, and people won't go and look at it and go and do something. As I said to you before I come on, my gas, water, and electric video from 11 years ago has suddenly started circulating again because of something that had happened with the channel. And people were saying, "Oh, well, it's all right saying do this now when we can't get them." Well, it was 11 years ago, Alex, when anybody could get them. They're handing them out with paper bills for like confetti, but nobody was interested. It's only now, and they don't realise just how long that has been sat there as remedy. You've got all these other things that come into factor as well, but we're all still looking and still using that terminology like, "Oh, how did you get out of this? Oh, you found a loophole." No, this is actually how it's meant to work, but you can't see it because of that brain damage, that programming, and it's been groomed into you. It's Stockholm syndrome, and then you start to fight the actual system, fight for the actual system. This is where it was a good test when they would your next door neighbour would grass you up for having 6 people when you're in your house when you're only entitled to 5. So when I saw that society can fall apart like that, and we know what We know the people who are doing this, the investments, the power structures, the bloodlines, and we know where all this goes. This is where the joinder is. We've got to get to this. I mean, I've seen some really good evidence of victories, not winning wars, but winning battles. You know, like liability orders, judges saying, "Yeah, no, that's a done deal. Like you can't use that." That means something. You know, you've got a grip on something. You've changed something there. So I can see that people are waking up and starting to change things. Do we get to the point we did 15 years ago, Alex, where people could see that thing turning, and then all of a sudden co-ops came in and people were disfragmented, and they all went off the reservations themselves, because you really put a lot of stuff into, you put a lot of effort into this studying and trying to do it and trying to perform it. Back then there were so many people who would just go, "Well, I'm not interested," and it hurts. People would call you names, people would attack you, people would say you're getting away with things and all that kind of stuff. And at that time, I'm understanding that I'm have to withdraw from society at that point, Alex, because you can't mix with people. I mean, people who knew me, because a lot of the people who I mixed with, if you forced them to think they could actually think, they wouldn't argue that something was what it wasn't when it was plain as anything. But other people would just argue about it. So I couldn't get my head around that, especially as it says in the video about people would get passionate about political opinions. But there are all those bullet points that you get from a 2-minute segment on the BBC, and then you flip over to Sky to get a slightly different bend on it, and then, ITV's on Channel 4, let's see. And you mix all that up and you then formulate an opinion which becomes what Jung was talking about. So you can see that society has been well and truly MK Ultra'd.
It has, and obviously that's an intersection point, isn't it, between the people who we've known, certainly since we started going to Bolton Freedom Advocates, so you're talking late 13, early 2014, maybe sooner for you, but that's when we met. So we're talking certainly like 12 years. And there are a lot of people who are, in that truth movement sense, awake, in the sense that they understand that things don't add up. And there's things going on out there in the world which aren't correct. Now, they can see those things and they lament those who are not awake. Obviously, we've got that word woke, which is a strange play on it, which is the exact opposite, because the woke are not awake. But the awake, in that sense, from the truth movement, it's all about those people who recognise intuitively that something's been wrong to varying degrees, and then they research, they go to a certain level of recognition about what's going on in the outer world, and then they say they're awake because they know there's something wrong, and they can trace together a lot of the, join the dots, where you've got the dots but you don't know what picture it makes. And they've taken a lot of those dots, joined them, and developed a view of the world, which is a bit like Noam Chomsky's propaganda model. You've got to reconstruct from a critical evaluation of the data. It's called, fancy name is phenomenological method. You study closely these separate things to see where there are anomalies and things that don't add up. If something happens once, you don't get paranoid about it. It happens twice on a graph, you can plot a line, a straight line. But when it's 3 times, it's like, this is getting a bit interesting. So there are plenty of people who call themselves awake that are awake in that sense, but not in the Jungian sense, because many of those people don't understand, as that video that you showed demonstrates, that they were projecting a lot of their internal stuff onto the external picture. So once they developed awareness and became awake about the state of the world, they were able to project their own discomfort with themselves and actually maybe double down on their inner, maybe a depression, maybe a self-neglect, maybe an attitude of blaming somebody else, so you can say, see, it's not my responsibility. I told you, I'm awake now. I can see what's really going on in this construct, and they can see everything going on in this construct except themselves. So the second level of becoming awake and aware is self-awareness. That's a big jump. There's loads of truthers who've got absolutely zero self-awareness. And you can get a truther who's aware of the state of the world and can hold that objectively, but they've also got inner awareness of their own moods, feelings, conditions, and they do not project them, they own them, and then they acknowledge that, well, we're all wounded. He talks about childhood wounds in a video. So that's the next level. And then, of course, beyond that, we've got the spiritual level, not just the psychological level, ultimate truth. How do we interpret the long haul of history and where everything's going? You know, Jung doesn't have to have a position on that. When you're dealing with personal psychology, it's just, I'm here now. I might be aware of the state of the world now, but I'm aware of myself, I have self-awareness. And then if you become self-aware, you can say you're healing, you can deal with your childhood wounds. All of that means you could become optimally functional in the world as it is now, but still be lost in spiritual terms. So it's a big part of it, being aware about the world, because without that, we wouldn't know about how the Babylonian system actually works. It'd just be a throwaway phrase. Oh, yeah, the Babylonian system. Oh, yeah, the beast system. It wouldn't mean anything. So we have to be awake about the world. We also have to be awake about our inner conditions. But then also we need to understand that we have to go to the next level. And that is where the personal accountability and recognizing where the true solution is, which, as you know, again, we'll keep saying, and we come back to the Jesus part of that. And this is where political solutions only are inadequate. And I noticed that Taylor joined the chat, bless him. And of course, Taylor brings that perspective, from the other side of the pond, and the significance of Trump regarding a story or a narrative about what we might consider to be true facts about what's really going on in the world, or the picture behind the picture, you know, the difference between the optics and the reality. When are they the same? When are they not the same? That's got value, and it's a big part. It's the first part of the equation, really, becoming awake and aware about what's going on in the world around you. I think what you brought with that opening video, Paul, is the next part of the equation, and I don't know if Taylor even saw it, but that would be interesting. Even if he didn't get to the Jesus part of the question, engaging with Jung, and I mean, you know, since you're on, Taylor, I'll just sort of say, you know, I'll direct it to you in a very gentle way. So, you know, you've got, let's say you've got your outer frame right regarding Q and Trump and the military and so on. And that's right. Nevertheless, in your own personal circumstances, let's just say in a very jokey way, you know, living at home with the libtards, as you put it, every now and again listening to what you're saying. And if they don't approve, maybe unplugging the router. Now, that again, when that happens, we've had a translation from the external truth of the picture and what's really going on. Yet at home, amongst your family, technically in that sense, you've got the enemy at the door, constantly ready, trying to sabotage you. And that creates personal dynamics in your own psychology, in your own soul. It can create tension, you know, and that could have been there, you know, from when you're born, because obviously when you're born, you're totally dependent on your parents and you shape an environment. So it's like something that you're wrestling with, struggling with. And sometimes we can fight battles, you know, in that arena, by seeing the injustices out in the world, and they all lived happily ever after when Commander Trump, has established the whole thing, and it's all sorted, and they all lived happily ever after. And then my world's going to get easier because everyone will see. But that isn't necessarily the case. So even before we get to the spiritual bit, the Jesus bit, the personal confession bit, this distinction between the external world and the political reality and what's going on, we've also got the personal one, and they are connected. Have you got a view on that, Taylor? Do you do any Jungian work on yourself?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you always got to make sure that you know, that you don't lose yourself, that you keep yourself grounded in the right things. Don't lose yourself to drugs or alcoholism or anything like that. You know what I mean? Don't be self-deluded, and also at the same time, don't fall into black pillness either. I've I try to tell people all that all the time. You know, keep that in mind. You know, don't fall into this into this negative state of thinking that there's no hope and that there's nothing, because it doesn't do anything for you. And not only is it wrong, but it also doesn't help you as an individual, because it keeps you in that negative state of mind, and that doesn't and it keeps you from being the best that you can be. Because at the end of the day, you can't exactly expect to succeed if you're always going or you can't expect anything to succeed if you always have a negative attitude about it. So,
the thing is, though, that video, I don't think you saw the video. The video was about the traumas that people have been subjected to. So you're coming at it from a perspective of, shall we say, some comfort, where you can have that width to be able to stand like that. I've been able to be in that position. Alex has been able to be in that position. But I've also been in the opposite position where there isn't anything, nothing whatsoever. We talked about it today, didn't we, Alex? How even you were saying there was an expectation of something always goes wrong. You always, no matter how hard you plan it and put it together, you put your rubbish in your bin and then you forgot to put your bin out. All stuff like that, and it's just those little things. So even though it's perfect what you're saying, Taylor, it's a perfect example, but we're trying to reach the people who haven't got that. We've got people who they just keep going every day. Every day they say, "I don't want to be here. I've give up. I'm done," but they're still here the next day. And it's that where we're trying to say that's where the spiritual is, because in the scriptures it says, in your weaknesses, at your very weakest, I'm your strength. And that's where all my strength is. And somehow these people just keep going. It doesn't cease to amaze, does it, Alex?
No. And I think that the thing about even if an external picture is true, we can distract ourselves from our own stuff by looking at the trueness of a picture and shaking the fist and ranting, saying, see, that's how it is. And I can see this connection, and that's right, and that's how it is. But we can disempower ourselves simply by putting our weight behind some form of theatre. Like often Taylor will use the word optics, and it's a good word, optics, and it's all show, and then we've got The Truman Show as a really good example of a movie that seems to represent the fact that there is a choreography that everyone seems to be involved in where they're in denial because they're living in a construct. It's a bit like the Russian doll we spoke about last week, and they think that the limits of that world is where it is. Now, I know there's been links with that movie, and some people say, well, specifically it's flat earth inspired, but even if you set that to one side, no matter what the limit is or the boundary is, at the end, Jim Carrey almost comically comes up some ladders, which is just some steps, and opens a door through a wall, and he has a choice to go through, and he's told that if he goes through, life will end as he knows it. But he's sick of the construct. He's had enough. It looks as if he may hesitate, and then it's like that wry smile, and he walks on through because he says, I don't know what is going to be beyond this particular wall, this particular boundary, but I can't be satisfied any longer living in this construct. I had the illusion of freedom. I was given all these things, but why was I given them? Was I being placated? Were they keeping me quiet? Was I being drugged with distraction? Was materialism taking me away from the ultimate reality beyond this construct? And all those things, he became convinced, and this is a metaphor, that he wasn't satisfied. And everyone's got to get to the point, I think, of saying, whatever version of theatre I've been addicted to, I see through it now. And how is anyone going to see through it? It's all right seeing that some of the facts don't add up, but what is that really telling us about the nature of reality? Is it just telling us that this person or that person's got a wrong agenda, or this person or that person's going to put it right? Or does it go much deeper than that? Does it come down to, in that Jungian sense, what am I going to do about that? And not necessarily by getting a placard and protesting or saying, oh, I've got more awareness. Oh, I've gone on a course. Oh, I challenge this person. No, fundamentally, what are you going to do about the fakeness of this construct? And what is your equivalent going to be to Jim Carrey walking through that door and saying, I'm done with it? And obviously, as we keep saying, Paul, our answer is that beyond that door is the freedom. It's not just a black space that Jim Carrey's going into. It's God and the kingdom, and that's it.
That's why we've got to see what is going on in this world. That's what drew my attention, to understand that the fundamental things that I've been taught, and then putting it all together with the wars, with the education system, with the taxes, and you're paying, and you just think there's something beyond this. This isn't just about some people having a bit of greed for money and secret, just people meeting in secret. It had to be more, because the bigger conspiracies, the JFKs, the 9/11s, they were apparent that there was questions, but I could never understand why people didn't have the same questions as me. So you was always fighting that nutter theory, conspiracy theories. We've got to a point now where it didn't matter what conspiracy theory that people would point to now. There's questions. So you only need two people to do something together against someone else. And that's not a theory, that's a conspiracy. And we see that everywhere. We've got so many conspiracies, we don't need the theories, because, as Taylor says, we've got this film that's playing out. We've got all these actors. We're trying to piece all this stuff together to try and get what narrative they're going to, and see who's against each other. For me, the WEF are trying to do stuff. Trump's doing stuff that's blocked England, the UK out of talks, and about the UN tried to put this worldwide tax on, and Trump's gone, that's not happening. And so it's like oh yes it is, oh no it isn't. That's what we've all got going on.
Yeah.
And then you get to your home life, and you've got your own stuff. So I kind of get it, but when something is wrong and it's being done wrong, and you don't do anything because you think you can't or you shouldn't say anything, that's where we ended up with Martin Niemöller. And we've danced our way into this, Alex. Communism's not too far away.
Yeah, but the other point about this is, let's just say a person, we could say Taylor with his perspective on Trump and the overarching narrative, and we can talk about the Russian doll, but it doesn't matter who it is, a journalistic person, an investigator, and let's just say, hypothetically speaking, that person was able to ascertain and determine with 100% accuracy every single fact that was the case in foreign policy, agendas, bloodline, families, everything. They had the complete picture, and they were 100% correct. And all that factual information was right. And if they were passing an exam on it, they get 100% because they have every detail. And still the question is, so what? Because just knowing that can add pain to you if nothing is happening and you can't leverage that knowledge to change the situation. So it's a big so what? So it's advantageous to have more accurate knowledge than inaccurate knowledge. It's better not to be led astray by error. But even when you've got 100% transparency, disclosure and truth and fact, so what? Because for a start, you can't get that into anybody else's brain, and unless you can operationalize it, it doesn't make any difference. And in fact, you could argue that it distracts you, because if we set up the equation that falsehood is bad, we can kid ourselves that if we didn't have falsehood and we knew all truth and all facts, everything would be fine. But like I've just said, so what? Knowing the truth and the facts, just because we know other stuff is wrong or something's bad, doesn't mean anything. It just means we have more accurate knowledge than a person who doesn't. What does that tell you about the state of your soul? It'd be like putting a badge on in arrogance, going, I know every fact about the state of the world, what's going on behind the scenes. There we go. Look at me. I'm going to pass my exam and get a gold star. I'm going to sit on a gold throne. Everyone's going to look at me and go, oh, isn't this person a genius? And the answer is still, so what? So that's another trap that the truth movement, unfortunately and inadvertently, sets up. The belief that just because so many things are wrong and so many people don't see it, aka the sheep, those people who were at the opposite end and saw everything, everything's fine because they saw everything. But what does that change? Apart from nothing. It just means you can help other people to see more clearly, which of course is a good thing, but it's What does it really achieve? Really? So what? It's the conditions within your own soul and your own conscious existence and what you're doing with that matters.
For me, being baptized in that fire of learning in the courts that the stuff we were working with was the real truth, and we saw the bewilderment on people who didn't understand it and then came to understand it, and to the point where magistrates were saying, I shouldn't be paying this tax. Well, you hear whispers, you hear people understanding things, then you see the pour out of anger. Armed police being called on you because you're asking questions. You can't report stolen property to the police because they've helped steal the property because they were surrounding you while the courts did all that. You actually watched all this happen. You're seeing a society falling apart, and the people who are now attacking you, which is your family, your friends, because you're trying to tell them this new information and this truth. It's doing the Jungian thing there. If you've only got that construct that this is all there is, then that's why my opinion, that's why we have people who keep falling off things, falling off bridges, and walking on motorways and train lines and things like that. This isn't. This is new. We've had things like that happen, obviously, but not like this. This is different. That video was it was the extreme end. This is he talked about how it slowly builds up over time. So if it's a slow build up, and he's talking about this in what was it, 1800s there, Alex, 1870s?
No, 1900s.
1900s. So even then, it's even less time. It's even less time. We've got the Tavistock Institute. We know all about what they win. I mean, Mandel House, Taylor knows quite a bit on all that kind of psychological warfare that's gone on. So we've got the psychological warfare going on here from bloodlines and elites that derive their power from dark spiritual forces that are being fought in the heavens. And then we've got all our individual spiritualities being attacked in the spirit, and it's all playing out down here. And that's where you end up on your knees in a caravan, 18 pints in, not wanting beer.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like we were saying before the show started, Paul. Obviously, when you put the video on, at one point he talked about childhood wounds, and we might say, well, we're not kids anymore. But then there is an inner child, and we know what Jesus said about suffer the little children to come to me. And it's the innocence, it's the purity. Unless you enter the kingdom of God like a little child, you won't enter it at all. Imagine a little child at the start of a journey with all the influences upon it, all the pain, all the wounds that are inflicted by unconscious parents, unconscious culture and society, bullying, abuse. It's a wonder that anybody survives intact. And so people walk around wounded. And it's like being at the foot of a mountain. You start your journey as a little kid, and you shouldn't be weighed down with these wounds, but you get wounded. And then you end up climbing up this mountain. And, when you look up to the top of Everest, it's like, whoa, that's a long way up. And when you start journeying up, it gets more and more grueling. And if you just keep looking up at the top for a long time, it looks just as far away as when you started. But when you turn around and you make a base camp and you go, oh, actually, I've covered some distance here, but I can't carry on indefinitely because I've got to recover, I've got to recoup, I've got to battle against the conditions, I've got to pitch my tent. It's got to be safe from the howling wind, so that I can get my sustenance, my rest, and then carry on. So that's a bit of a metaphor, really. We're climbing up that mountain wounded from the beginning, as if it wasn't difficult enough. The external conditions are tough in climbing that mountain. It's a long, grueling journey, and we're carrying all these wounds, and we don't know if our provisions will last, and we don't know if we'll slip on the side, and ultimately we're dealing with all these factors. And that's basically a metaphor that's similar to what Jesus meant when he said, take up your cross daily and follow me. You will be persecuted. It will be like carrying your own cross. And yet, as we said on our meeting on Tuesday, the irony, that the contradiction or paradox almost, that Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." So following Jesus is like taking up a cross, getting persecuted, climbing up a mountain with a heavy weight on your back, struggling to get to the summit maybe all your life. And most people go, well, who'd sign up for that? And yet he says, when you do that and you're weary and heavy laden, come to me and I'll give you rest. I'll be your support as you climb this mountain. Everyone's climbing a mountain. A lot of it's created by the culture and the world we've been born into. Then it infects us. It's outside of us. It's inside of us. The question then is, how do you get released from that? How do you get purified? How do you get strengthened? You need people around you. This is where Tifa 2 is talking about the church. Okay, so Tifa 2 is talking particularly about how the Orthodox communion is the church. But even if you don't go down that specific expression within the Orthodox communion, the church, universal as described in the New Testament, is about that fellowship. It's about, so you need people around you as a support structure. You need to be galvanized on the inside. The Jungian video, you need to take responsibility for your wounds and not blame everyone else. And you can get demoralized easily if you're halfway up Everest and the weather conditions are terrible and you're running out of food. Who are you going to call on then? So, you know, this is, I think, a strong sort of integrated parable for what the journey with God looks like. And, you know, maybe some people say, I don't want to climb this mountain and jump off like they've been jumping off these motorway bridges, Paul. But, you know, no one said it was going to be easy. But hopefully at the end, the point is we join Jesus on the top of the pinnacle.
I think, like I said, it's hard to not speak from experience because, as you said earlier, that it doesn't matter, you can't put the knowledge into people's heads, you can only give people the information. The difficult thing, what I found, one of the most difficult things I found was in .gov.uk legislation, I could prove that we shouldn't be doing what we were doing with gas, water and electric, and people didn't care. That's why it's interesting that old video has resurrected so much interest, because people didn't care about that video then because people could afford things. People didn't see how close it was. But, you know, it doesn't take long for it to get worse and worse. And it was when I saw how this world was and put me into such a desperate place, Alex, it was, well, what else is there? Because, you know, I've said before that when my dad was killed, I knew there was something after this life. I didn't know what, I didn't know how. I knew. I just felt it can't just be done. I don't understand nothing, you know, because even in nothing, I'm going, well, if I hold my breath and I can't imagine nothing. So I looked at everything. Religions weren't it. I ended up going into mediumship. I got something out of it, but it was life-changing. But when you realise that if there is nothing, and these people have got all this monopoly, and you've never been free, because as free as you think you are, it's because you can choose between a Big Mac or a Whopper, because you've got choices. It's like, what's the point? If there's nothing, what is the point? So, you know, it wasn't without those experiences and trauma, being at that desperate point. That was where I was broken. That was where it came to me, that, you know, that build-up of pressure, and then that one morning where it is done. And that was like a release valve that just made me go, well, I'm going to have a look at that. I'm going to have to read the Bible for myself and just see. You know, I've done that in my life before, where I've took other people's words for things and it doesn't seem quite right. And then when you go and look at it yourself, it wasn't as complicated as what you thought it was. Yeah. So I just had to trust that something had changed, something had happened. I knew it had happened because of how much it had changed me. People who know me well knew what it had done. You know, most people just thought I'd, you know, fell out my tree again. They thought I'd gone nuts. But you're always going to see nuts when you're trying to show truth that is going to damage people's paradigms. You know, work hard, pay your bills, Alex. That's not right. That shattered my paradigm. And then to be called names for telling people that, look at what's happening. It was
Hey,
beyond
Paul, they weren't calling you silly sausage, were they?
it. What?
They weren't calling you silly sausage, were they either?
No.
No.
I've got a big
No.
sausage.
You've got a big sausage, Taylor. Would you like
I
to
do.
tell us a bit more about that?
Nah, because I'm not gay. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just thought I'd let you all know. Nothing beyond that.
Okay. So what do you make of that, Paul? About what do you make of Taylor's big sausage?
Well, then anybody who normally brags about it and never uses it.
Man, fuck you, bro.
Anyway, I've got a video for you, Taylor. Because have you got stuff to present tonight?
I do, and I would actually like to do a historical segment tonight, because I thought I'd change it up a little bit. I like to, because most of you guys are living across the pond, I want to give you guys a little bit of a historical treat for, specifically, I'd like to talk about President Jimmy Carter, because there's a lot of misconceived notions about him. So I want to talk about him.
Okay, so we're having a historical perspective, because on this show we don't take historical facts. We take information and then we discern it. So I'm interested in where you're going to go with it. I hope it links up with things, though. You are going to be able to segue and link things, aren't you?
Well, of course. Everything's connected in some way. It all really you just have to be aware of what it links to. That really just comes down to noticing patterns and all that. The usual stuff.
Yeah. Right. Well, let's see what you think of this one, Taylor. This is our old friend Alex Jones. Let's see what you think.
2 weeks ago, on my syndicated broadcast, General Flynn, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, predicted that in the coming months or even weeks, the deep state CIA elements allied with the Democratic Party, the Communist China, Venezuela, and others will begin triggering sleeper cells inside the United States, particularly Islamic. I'll post the interview below. He was on my broadcast yesterday and pointed out that all the evidence is clear. We've also had whistleblowers that have talked to Jesse Waters and others at Fox from inside the CIA, that this whole program with the Seditious Six and the script they were given, Brennan's the handler, former head of the CIA, from my analysis. This whole operation they've been running of implying Trump's putting out illegal orders is ahead of major events to destabilize the United States with different paramilitary forces. And then when Trump tries to call the military, the corporate media would already pre-planted the idea that his orders are illegal. This is sedition. This is the prep phase for a violent coup. And I've been predicting it along with General Flynn as well. This is a very, very serious time right now. And now we know, as you see below, it's been released by CIA Director Ratcliffe. Laura Logan has posted information, and she's got incredible intel connections also with that this guy was part of the CIA strike force. That's what his ID says, in Afghanistan. And of course, her husband's been employed over there for forever and was leading commander. And is also a very good source of information on that front. So this is a major message to Trump. This is a probe. This was just literally hundreds of feet away from the fence of the White House. And there's going to be more of this. So people better get ready. It's very, 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 very serious. Of course, Biden brought hundreds of thousands of these people into the country. And they need to be deported. media trying to spin it now because the Trump administration approved one level of his asylum last year. But that's just because that's part of the larger process that Biden set up. And now those policies need to be reversed, and they need to go in and kick out all of these paramilitary Afghans, even if they, quote, work for the CIA. But this guy clearly is working for these very elements. Remember John Brennan is a Muslim and a communist. He brags about it. People always are blown away by that. If you look at that, he brags about it in Arabic. And they're working with these different terror networks, and they use them as a covert army. And they're gearing up the drug cartels and others to wreak havoc in the stations. General Flynn didn't just predict that. He has sources that give him the chatter, and information is being picked up on getting that from other law enforcement intelligence sources as well. So very sad for the 2 National Guard soldiers that were shot. The governor of West Virginia came out, they were deployed from it, said they were dead. Now there's conflicting reports. We'll continue to watch this as it unfolds. Everybody's put their head on a swivel, and we don't need to give into this intimidation. The left wants the troops off the streets because they want the crowd to be high. They want to be able to launch the Civil War and bill it as George Floyd 2.0. It had to be race-based, but the dog isn't going to hunt because we've been ahead of the curve and exposed their plans before they do it. God bless you all. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Unpack that for us, Taylor.
Okay, well, first of all, let me just say this, that I've been saying for a while now, and I detected this a while ago, that Alex Jones was flipped. This is somebody who we've known for the longest time has always been one of those grifter types. He would never talk about Israel or the Mossad. He would only talk about the CIA, which is clearly, we know the deep state implanted these halfway houses into the alternative media. We know that. So at the end of the day, we know that Alex Jones, or I can't prove it, obviously, but we've known that Alex Jones has been a grifter for some time. But at the same time, recently, now that we know that everything is under the control of the Q operation, we know that Alex Jones has been flipped. His attitude has changed. He's talked about Israel more and more with Gaza, and even talked about Israel's relationship to 9/11. And he's actually become quite interesting to listen to in recent times. He's almost another Tucker Carlson, which makes sense because when you think about it, the Q operation had to seize these big voices in both the mainstream media and the alternative media that were either grifters or were only able to go halfway because of their positions in society. So you have your Alex. So basically, my point is, getting back to the question, is that he's talking about this Afghan thing that happened in recently. It was a few days ago in Washington, D.C.
For people who don't know, 2 National Guards were killed allegedly by an Afghanistan military individual that's allegedly, but Alex Jones is saying, working for the CIA. So what part of the plan is this? You're saying he's a grifter. I've heard all this. I mean, I'm still struggling to understand how somebody can get sued for 45 billion and still be doing this stuff. I don't know how it works, mate. But
that's all part of the show.
My mum always said, Taylor, that they can do anything on the telly. So you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, I'm still here. My bad. But yeah. So yeah, that's just like you were saying. It's all part of the show. This whole, it's just so hilarious that people fell for that Alex Jones, what was it, like $45 million suing or whatever it was. And yet he's still around to this day. It tells you quite a bit that there's a lot more to this than what meets the eye. So at the end of the day, what has to be taken into account here is, first of all, that Afghan thing. There was a whole lot of red flags with that event. All the 17s, all of the all the placements and everything, all the comms that we got out of that just screamed to me that this was either a false event or this was a staged event, either or, because they can do both. They can say something.
Do you see how that links with what we were talking about?
Yes, please don't interrupt me.
Excuse me.
Sorry, I don't like. I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to get to the point, but you keep interrupting me. So, my apologies. Just let me say this: that when it comes to the plan and it comes to the Q stuff, right now and Alex Jones mentioned the story about him being linked to the CIA, which is good because part of the Q operations mission has been to dismantle the CIA into 1,000 pieces, just like Kennedy was going to do in the 60s. Because the CIA, as we know, has always been a part of the deep state since the beginning. And so when you plant this story of this so-called Afghan, quote unquote, CIA officer being linked to a assassination of 2 National Guardsmen, you have the what's it called? You have the story now brewing in the media, and now we have the public now aware of the getting more and more aware of the Afghan link to the CIA. How the CIA would always use what's it called? Radicals in these Islamic countries in order to enact plots so that way that they could enact control over the public. For example, 9/11 being a key example, all these false flag terror plots. And so this whole thing, if you ask me, and this is pretty clear if you go by the evidence, is that this is a ploy in order to get the public more and more aware, not only of the cultural differences between the war-torn Middle East and the United States and Western countries as a whole, but also to show the public that the CIA has, exactly what it's always been known for, which is cultivating terror cells in the Middle East and using them as boogeymen in order to enact power grabs. Which makes sense then, because they've been doing this ever since the 70s. So, replays are necessary, as Q said. You have to get people to see these things for themselves, so that they'll understand it. Because it's like you said earlier, Alex, you can't tell these people the things. It doesn't work that way. You have to know your place and know what you can and cannot do, and then try to fight and try to do that to the best of your ability. And in this case, this is show and tell. Show your people. Show them exactly just how evil the CIA actually has been all these decades. And this wouldn't be happening. Just think about it this way. If this was normal times, if there was no Q operation, why in the world with the media, whether would be pumping out this idea that he was linked to the CIA? It doesn't make any sense. You don't expose yourself like that. So it's just another classic example of things just going the way that they should. All part of the plan, as they say. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad you've given me permission to speak on my own show, Taylor.
No, sorry if I was a little rude. It's just
yes, you was very rude.
I apologize. I wasn't trying to be rude. I just
apology, because this isn't a talk show like that. We have debates, we have conversations, we link things. You talk over us all the time. It's a conversation. We don't cut things. I know you might have something going on in the background as well, but your information's good and we want to interact with it. We don't just want you to teach us. We want to interact. So I know you want to get to points, but other people who are watching this show, as I said, I'd like to take this point just to intervene, Taylor, at this, because I had a massive surprise that we'd gone over 3,000 subscribers. That's like, it was a shock to see that, because we don't do this for that, but to see other people now learning, coming onto this thing, you're so deep, Taylor, they're not going to understand it. So you can't just run away with all that information, because when somebody tunes in and you're doing that, it doesn't always get across. So we have to break it up. Does that make sense, mate?
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand what you're saying.
Okay, then. So I accept your apology. Now I'd like you to continue with your presentation, as long as it doesn't go on for 17 hours.
I like that number you used there.
Yes.
You did that on purpose?
Myself, I might not. I can neither confirm nor deny that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, I apologize for that. I'm not trying to be rude. I understand this is your show.
I
So.
accept your apology, mate. Take us away.
All right. Well, that's pretty much my thoughts on that whole Afghan situation. The whole thing, just screams psyop. Here's the thing: is that nowadays, I just assume everything is a psyop until proven otherwise. Because it's just like, at the end of the day, when you see everything just has so many holes in it, and you see it's just like, oh, this could not have happened under normal circumstances, you just think to yourself, clearly there's something more to this than just, oh, some dude did this or some dude did that. It's just like with the ICE protests. When you have all of these so-called people going out there and doing this and doing that, when it's clear that this whole thing is just staged in order to evoke what's it called? What's the word I'm looking for?
Conspiracy theories.
Pretty much, yeah. Get people interested and coming to conclusions themselves rather than it having to be told for them. So yeah, at the end of the day, get people thinking and people to realize stuff on their own, because like you said,
I was just going to say, that's why the point is, when all these theories are coming out about the same thing, like we take Charlie Kirk, for example, shot from the front, shot from the back, radio mic. We've got 3 things there. Everybody's going to argue which one's right, while nobody cares about anybody taking any cameras down or anything like that. Things are happening and we're debating what's going on, but what's going on is still going on. It's that smoke and mirrors, isn't it? We're watching where the smoke was, but they've already ran off and we're still waiting for them to still be behind the smoke, aren't we?
Well, yeah. So, it's just like there's certain arguments that are just completely pointless to have, just because of it's just like it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So find the stuff that's necessary and find the stuff that isn't, and then just work with it like that.
Well, that's the point. The people who are now tuning in, because everybody knows there's something wrong, they're finding things wrong that are really wrong to them, and they're reaching out to people. And sometimes, like I said, all that kind of information, Taylor, that's heavy duty, that. I used to have a friend who, when she first started to realise everything was joined together, she'd almost like start a sentence off with JFK, gone to RFK, MLK, gone to 9/11, gone to 7/7, gone to debt-based economy, gone to taxes, and they've only said how are it was too much information, so people tend to go, I'll stay away from that. So that kind of information, we've got to try and say, well, that part of that information also links to this, because it's this. And that's why we can't be structured like Alex says about the Russian dolls. We can't say that, hey, we've got all the facts about this now, I don't need to know anything more. Because that's how I started my life, Taylor. Work hard, pay your bills. I don't need to know anything more than at least if I do that, I'm covered. I didn't care to think. And that's where, when you said, let people work it out for themselves, well, if I only give you certain amount of choices, what are the odds on me being able to work out every single choice that you're going to make and be able to set up the ready-made consequences for that? The Hegelian dialectic, the problem, the reaction, solution. That's what's happening in society. That's what's happening in America right now. And that's why I'm saying, where do all these people fit in? Alex Jones, flipped, grifter. Is it Alex Jones? He looks a little bit different, but he's older. He's done a bit more weightlifting, whatever, his information's got a lot sharper again after it went all bandy, because Alex Jones had a lot of great information 25 years ago. You know, top information. He was on point with a lot of stuff. But he also kind of, he was buffooned because, I mean, he got clipped for saying about the frogs being turned gay. And it was only that clip that people didn't bother listening to him. They never listened to what was being, you know, the medications that was going into the water supply that was feminizing masculinity. You know, whether it was a part of an agenda or not, that was happening. But all you heard was Alex Jones saying that it's turning the frogs gay. And people just go, oh, he's a nut to that, Alex Jones. So they don't bother. I had friends who did that. So that's why we've got to break this information down and join it up. That's why when I don't know what you're going to do with Jimmy Carter, where you're going with him. If you're going to start saying he's JFK in disguise,
No, I'm not going there. I'm not going.
Just before maybe we segue into that, for Taylor to look at Jimmy Carter, I just want to make an observation at this point, because I think I've discerned something that's actually quite relevant. So one time when I was writing a book that I never actually finished, which was interesting.
You've written a book?
No, I wrote a book that I didn't finish. This was
research. You nearly wrote a book.
Oh no, on that one, it was there. And I got copies of the Hansard, which is the minutes of Parliament. But I was doing it for historical research because I wanted to get information that was current on specific days in the 1940s, just before or just after the end of the Second World War. And it was because I understood about the silver content in coinage was reduced at the end of 1946. So all the 1947 coins, silver coins, had no silver in them. I think it was about 1913 and 1914 that Parliament had voted out any gold content in coins. And it was 1947 when it finally left silver coinage. That was significant because the value of that which crossed Japan, this was the start of moving towards valueless currency, led us to where we're at today with fiat in that sort of way. But what was interesting about the Hansard, you had all this stuff going on, and you could see in some of it, the stuff that wasn't of any interest to me about these things I was going to use. I was going to put some of these details in a newspaper seller's stall as newspaper headlines. And I was using the Hansard so that it would actually correspond to what happened historically. But I read a lot of stuff, apart from the stuff that was of interest to me, because obviously I'm trawling through it to find the relevant bits to put in newspaper clippings from this vendor. And there was a lot of very interesting extended rhetoric where people would stand up and make really long speeches, sometimes a bit like us on this show. And they would speak and they'd do oratory for sometimes 5-10 minutes. Everybody else would be there in silence. I think it was perhaps about 15 years ago when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. And somebody joked, because you had Prime Minister's questions and the TV cameras appeared in Parliament, and somebody made like a really raucous comment everybody laughed at, talking about one speaker's political philosophy. And they all laughed because they all knew how ridiculous it was, how ironic it was to even talk about political philosophy now in Parliament. And it made me think. So that was about 2007, 2008. So you're talking 60 years after I was looking at these copies of the Hansard, where these politicians were giving long monologues involving political philosophy and things that mattered. In 60 years, it had become a standing joke that you could have political philosophy in Parliament. But the whole idea about Parliament was that it was oppositional politics. So, you know, basically, one side would say one thing or adopt some policies, and then the other side would come in and confront those policies. And that's what the concept of opposition is about. And the idea, the underlying philosophical idea, was that by throwing these ideas around and having conflict, and then latterly with the cameras, that people could be involved in this and see the conflict, that we might get to the truth by throwing our ideas around. Now, we've not got time for that today, because it's all pragmatic stuff. The decisions are made before they go in. They just legislate the policies that they want. But in the true spirit of political philosophy, if it had been working properly, you'd have had a debate that was confrontational, oppositional, and by the war of ideas, everybody would get challenged and we'd come to the truth somehow. There is another way to do it. And the other way to do it is to stick to your own narrative relentlessly and just repeat it over and over again. and rather than trying to find a middle ground, through that conflict, you just steamroll your way through, refine your own ideas, stick to your own paradigm, try and strengthen your own position more, and actually disregard the other party's positions. So just keep making a case for yours and make a stronger and stronger case for yours and disregard the opponents completely. They're two completely different approaches. Now, Taylor's approach is the second approach. So he takes the QAnon thing, the Trump thing and so on, and he takes that as his entry point, and all his research is aggregated or arranged around that entry point, and he builds a case around that. That could be a really strong thing for research, but it can have the blind spots because it doesn't engage, and this is what you were asking for, Paul. For Taylor's paradigm to engage the spiritual paradigm, the Alex Jones paradigm. So what you've effectively been challenging him to do is get him to take this well-developed research position that he has defended against all comers simply by doubling down on it and becoming more comprehensive in it, to get that to start to engage more. So you're actually coming from two different ideological standpoints. So yours is much more like that traditional view of Parliament, Paul, where they basically, knocking heads, refining ideas, and we'd say iron sharpens iron if it was Christian fellowship, and that there's something to be gained out of that wrangling. And Taylor's position is to, cement and strengthen his own paradigm and keep making a case for it to convince people. And it's less about engaging and having that conversation and tweaking your own position. Both positions are valid; they're just different. And I think that might explain. Sometimes when you get a little bit of tension in these areas, it's because you're using two different approaches to how ideas are tested, validated, and communicated.
I think also because, as Taylor will tell you, that he's been attacked so often about his information that he gets. He's built a lot of strongholds. A lot of walls have been built solid because he's had to go and he's constantly talked about one point all the time, and I get that's why it gets so annoying. But there's new listeners coming on all the time, and that's what Alex. What I'd join on to what Alex is saying is where those walls have become your defences. You now need to make some allowances and stop defending, not attack, but allow that information to come out. And not just presume that not everybody knows that Alex Jones is this grifter, because, he's a very strange actor. I'm pretty convinced he's not Bill Hicks. I'm gonna say.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that theory. I'm not going to lie. I completely forgot about that.
So do you need to share screen? Because there's nothing come up yet.
Yeah, just give me a second. I'm just trying to decide exactly what points I want to bring up. Because when you talk about certain things, you have to make sure that you what's it called? You have to make sure that you condense it down. Because at the end of the day, we only have so much time on the show, and at the same time, when you talk about something like a presidency, you have to make sure that you condense it down to what is the most important.
Well, I'll tell you what. Show me. Can you find the points of Jimmy Carter's presidency that linked things to, because Reagan, like I said to you in private chat, that Reagan was one of the first presidents I heard. I mean, Kennedy wanted to go to space, but Reagan called for an external threat, and we've got the Disclosure Project coming up. So, Carter was? There's not many people think Carter did much, did they? But sometimes those intermediates, those little presidents, can be quite a linchpin. So can you show the links to where we've got to now? What part he played, and was he a white hat or a black hat?
Well, first of all, in short, he was a black hat. You see, people get this misconception about Jimmy Carter, saying that he was a nice guy just in over his head. But he meant well, which is absolute BS. It's absolute BS, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and talk about it real quick. So first of all, Jimmy Carter came in 1976 off the backdrop of the Watergate situation, and a deep state coup in order to take down Richard Nixon because he was not one of them, and he wanted to end the Vietnam War and the Cold War. He wanted to he wanted to weaken government and weaken its programs, have less spending, etc. And so they got rid of him with this Watergate coup using let me quickly sum it up. In that the CIA and the Washington Post, along with the mainstream media, worked together in order to bring down Nixon by hiring the CIA officers to be so-called journalists and these so-called burglars into the Watergate Hotel. It was basically a nothing burger, and the media, they blew it out of proportion. Nixon had to, and eventually Nixon was forced to resign because he was going to get kicked out anyway because the media was all against him. And even some good Republicans caved at that point because they decided, hey, the power is against us. What can we do? So then Nixon was kicked out, and we had Gerald Ford become president. He was a big disaster. Only 2.5 years, but he was a disaster. I'll get to that. We can talk about that some other time. So Jimmy Carter won in 1976 because everyone thought the Republican Party was to blame, was corrupted because of Watergate. And he comes in 1977 to 1980, only one term. But let's go ahead and talk about the first thing that he did, which, first of all, let me just say this, that Jimmy Carter was a member, he was one of the founding members of the Trilateral Commission. And we know what the Trilateral Commission is. Founded in 1973, I believe, by David Rockefeller. Gerald Ford was also a founding member of the Trilateral Commission, globalist institution. I'm sure that you are all aware of that. So, first of all, we have this right here. Also, I should mention that his handler was his national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Mika's daddy. You guys all know Zbigniew Brzezinski. Wrote the Grand Chessboard, basically told us 9/11 was going to happen in his book that he released in the late 90s. He was David Rockefeller's right-hand man, and he was Jimmy Carter's handler. So that alone should tell you everything you need to know. Now, he has this reputation of being a peanut farmer, a nice, humble peanut farmer, but it's not true. He inherited a peanut farm from his dad. He never did any of the actual farming himself. It was all just for cameras. And he also had this reputation of, wearing this shitty little, pardon my language, this little Mr. Rogers sweater. Turn your thermostat down, save on electricity, save on energy, blah, 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 blah. Carrying his own suitcases, when it's all just a bunch of BS. Those were all empty suitcases. His wife, Rosalind Carter, was known as a huge bitch. So, just wanted to get a couple of things out of the way. Here's the first big thing he did as soon as he got into office. He gave the Panama Canal away to Panama. The Panama Canal, which the United States built, hundreds of thousands of people died in order to build it. And so this man, by giving away the Panama Canal, he was doing the bidding of his globalist handlers who were saying that there will be no United States at the end of when the New World Order comes in. We must weaken it to give power to a central authority. Of course, thanks to Trump, that's been reversed. But this was all a ploy in order to basically weaken the United States. The Panama Canal, and this is during the Cold War as well. Remember, so this has strategic purposes as well. Carter just gave it away for a penny, essentially. Disgusting. That's the equivalent of the UK willingly giving away Sweden or something like that.
Why did he do that?
As I just said, weaken the United States, because at the end of the day, because the whole plan was the New World Order. There will be no United States. There will only be a one world government.
So if we bring Carter back now, was Biden, Obama, all that? Is that Clinton? Is that the same side?
Yes, the globalist side.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, basically, yeah, to answer your question.
Yeah.
So there's that. That's already bad enough, and you can already see where this is going. And so next we have, what was that? What was that called? I'm trying to remember. Let me search this up real quick. You can use this. Yes, I forget what the treaty was called. Oh, the Camp David Accords. Yes, the Camp David Accords. Yes, you guys are all aware, or at least I'm sure that many of you know that this was a quote unquote attempt in order to pacify the Middle East, to work with the Egyptian president Yitzhak Rabin. I mean, not Rabin. What was the prime minister's? Oh, what was forget his name, but whatever. The point is that Carter was trying to pacify the Middle East and trying to create a peaceful area over there. And people like to look at Carter as being some kind of anti-Israel guy because of that. So he's a good guy, right? Well, no, not necessarily. Because I mentioned this on the show before, but I'll say it. But I'll say it here for anyone who doesn't know. Because as you say, there are new people joining all the time. So, there's always been this factional divide between the ruling class, the New World Order elites. You have the globalist side, who just want aka the Marxist side, the Lenin, the Trotsky types, who just want one world government. They don't care about any particular country. They just want a new world order, one world government, and based in the United Nations and the EU. And they don't particularly care about Israel, because to them they just see Israel as a big problem, because Israel is always creating chaos in the Middle East, which makes it very difficult to get the Arab nations on board with the New World Order. I'll give you a couple of examples here. Roosevelt, FDR, was a hardcore Marxist, hardcore globalist, but it later came out that he was 100% against the nation and the creation of the state of Israel. And if he had lived, Israel would not have been formed in 1948. Another couple of examples. George Soros, Jewish, by the way. He and Benjamin Netanyahu always hated each other because, again, George Soros was a hardcore globalist type, a Marxist. And then it brings you to the other side, the Zionist crowd, the hardcore Zionists, the ones who don't care really about the one world government. All they care about is the Greater Israel Project. So all they want. So yeah, your Netanyahu's types, your Likud types, essentially. And they just see, and they work with, these two sides, they work together a lot. It's just like two mafia families, right? Like the five big mafia families of New York. They're all mafia families, but they do fight against each other every now and then, and they do have quarrels, and they end up even shooting and killing each other at times. It's a battle between gangsters, essentially. They do work together, like on 9/11, for example, or the Kennedy assassination. For these big events that benefit both of them, they'll work together. But most of the time, they're against each other. And that's what Jimmy Carter was. He was a globalist who wanted to pacify the region in order to create the New World Order. The Camp David Accords are put down, though, because of the influence of the Zionist crowd. So, and this, I mentioned this before as well, that Bill Clinton tried to do the same thing. We'll get to him some other time. So I just wanted to clear this up for anyone who viewed Carter as a anti-Israel, as a pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist kind of guy. It's just absolutely not true. Next thing I want to talk about is the what was it called? The fall of Iran in 1979. In 1979, I don't even think I need a slide for this. In 1979, the Shah fell. The Shah, who was put there in 1953 by the Eisenhower State Department in order to replace the previous Iranian president, who was trying to nationalize the oil market. The Shah, he was very friendly with the United States, but he was becoming very national as well, and he wanted no part of the New World Order, especially the Greater Israel Project. So they wanted him gone. the Carter State Department, headed by Zbigniew Brzezinski as National Security Advisor, he started to ship arms to the Ayatollahs and none to the Shah, as well as promoting the Ayatollahs, which ended up weakening the Shah, and he ended up having to flee Iran in 1979 and coming to the United States. Thus, the Ayatollahs took over Iran. And this isn't to say that they love the Ayatollahs or anything like that, but this is a matter of we want to get rid of all nationalist governments in the whole world. And if we have to replace them with communists who we'll turn against later, we'll worry about that when it needs to be worried about. But the number one priority, get rid of all nationalist governments, get rid of all populist forms of all populist countries. That's the number one thing. That's what the Cold War was all about, and that's what they did that with World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. Everything was all about that. So, if you're wondering why exactly Iran has always been such a hotbed for terrorist activity and extremism, well, that's the reason why. You can thank Jimmy Carter for that and his handler Zbigniew Brzezinski. They caused that problem. Yeah, this led to the Muslim Brotherhood. This led to a lot of the when Obama was shipping a bunch of money to Iran in was it 2015, 2016?
Yeah.
So, yep. So that was the whole thing. Just build a hotbed over in the Middle East to create a bunch of extremist Muslims in order to bring over here, so that way that they can replace the white people. The Kalergi plan, as you know.
Yeah.
The next thing, Nicaragua. And Jimmy Carter, he was working again. Another, just like with Iran, he worked with through Zbigniew Brzezinski, his handler, to undermine the nationalist government in Nicaragua. This was because Nicaragua was hardcore anti-communist. It also was it also was friendly with the United States, but they wanted them out because, again, nationalist government. They wanted to, so they started representing Anastasio Somoza as a racist, as a dictator, etc. The classic, the hit, just like they did with Hitler, just like they did with Mussolini, just like they did with Putin, etc. Just portray your enemy as a dictator, as a racist, as a fascist, etc. And then you have the international community going against them. In 1979, unfortunately, Somoza was forced to flee Nicaragua. He came to, if I remember correctly, he came to Miami after that. And Nicaragua was taken control of by, guess who? A communist. Of course, a hardcore communist. I forget his name.
Didn't they fight the commies? They didn't like the commies. What's going on?
Well, I'll try to condense it for time's sake, and that being that the entire purpose of the Cold War initially was that Stalin, who worked with the West, because the Soviet Union was a creation of the West. Stalin, they gave him Eastern Europe and a lot of Asia at Yalta at the end of World War II, because they thought that Stalin was going to go along with them and work in creating the New World Order. That's what World War II was all about. But the thing is that Stalin, he wasn't like Lenin or Trotsky. He wasn't like Trotsky, who wanted he wasn't a Marxist New World Order kind of guy. He wanted the Soviet Union to be the head of the New World Order. And he wanted the Soviet Union to be the strongest nation in the world. And so essentially, again, it was a fight between two rival gangsters. He wasn't on board with submitting to New York or London. So they basically said, hey, you know what? If he's not going to work with us, we'll take him out then. After Stalin died, though, in 1953, most likely poisoned, by the way. I'm sure you know that story. He was the communist leaders who took control after that, like Khrushchev, what's his name? Everyone else. They were communists, of course. but they were a lot more negotiable and a lot more easy to get along with and negotiate with than the original communist Marxists of 1917 and 1905. You know, Stalin was gone, Lenin's gone, Trotsky's gone, all these people are gone. And the next generation, you know, they wanted to work with the United States, but the globalists, the New World Order people, said no, because we want to undermine the Soviet Union and destroy it and take control of its vast territories and republics and implement them into the New World Order. So first, what they would do was they would use the guise of communism and have them take over all the nationalist countries that were left in the world. So Nicaragua, South Africa, which we'll get to in a second. Cuba in 1959, Iran, etc., etc. You know, take down all these nationalist countries, put in a communist, and then later they would undermine the communist because they're not ideal either, but they're much more manageable than say a nationalist government, which they wanted gone. Again, like I said, that's what World War I, World War II were all about, to get rid of all the nationalist governments around the world. So that's a bit of a summary of that.
That's why those wars created countries that weren't in Europe. They drew boundaries and mixed people up and then gave them governments, because they all argued over governments. So they were able to do all those regime changes that they were doing in Iran. They were able to do all that by doing those two world wars. And that's why it was so pertinent about the video that we had at the beginning, was because from that, those societies have been not only subjected to psychological warfare all the way through all that, but conditioned through an education system, drip-fed certain facts about history, which erases other facts about history. That's why it's been so pertinent that we start to draw the dots to the information that isn't so well known. You know, not many people know that the same people that funded the Bolsheviks were funding the Nazi Party to get into power. So we've got to start joining these dots for people, Taylor, because, you know, we sometimes really take it for granted that we know this information. But as I've said, we've been inundated with messages this week of new people coming listening. So that's why it's interesting to join all these. So go on, carry on, mate.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bring up a better tab because I think this one will be better to illustrate what I'm talking about here. And that would be this one right here. Give me a second. This one right here. So we talked about Nicaragua and how they got rid of Somoza because he was a populist nationalist leader, hardcore anti-communist. Now let's talk about the next place that Carter went to in order to, like, he's just going everywhere. He's like Churchill, just lighting, it's just like Hitler said about Churchill, being an arsonist, starting fires all over Europe. Although in Carter's case, it was all over Africa and South America. So next, we're going to talk about Rhodesia. Carter, so here's a good one right here. Carter was the first American president to condemn white minority rule in Rhodesia, a conservative and prosperous nation built by the whites of English origin. By winning repeal of U.S. laws which had undercut UN sanctions on the anti-communist Rhodesian government of Ian Smith, Carter was able to pressure Smith into holding multiracial elections. This relentless pressure, applied in the name of human rights, led to the 1979 Rhodesia elections and the eventual creation of Zimbabwe in 1980. Zimbabwe was then recognized internationally as an independent country. The black tyrant, Robert Mugabe, whose campaign slogan of one man, one vote, left out the part about elections only being one time, ran the country into the ground. Beast Mugabe's red reign of terror, hyperinflationary ruin, and anti-white oppression would last 37 years until he was finally forced to step down in 2017. The current black government of Zimbabwe is now pleading for the dispossessed white farming families to come back. And, you know, actually, real quick, I'd actually like you to look something up about Zimbabwe. They have a 100 They have a $1 trillion bill. That's how bad the inflation is over there. $1 trillion. It's an absolute shithole of a country, Zimbabwe. Because they wanted the quote unquote black majority to take over, giving the excuse for a hardcore communist to come over and rule the country. It ended up creating a shithole, quite frankly. It was terrible. And then all the white farmers had to leave Zimbabwe because they were being oppressed and being murdered and systematically oppressed. So they fled.
Do they create our chaos, Taylor?
Oh yeah, they do. Absolutely. Chaos and order out of chaos. That's what they do. They create the problem and then they give us a solution to it. Problem, reaction, solution. That's always been the
Hegelian dialectic.
Exactly. Next up, South Africa. South Africa. We know that South Africa was created in the 1600s by English migrants who built the country from scratch. It was just a bunch of land, nothing there, and virgin land. And these people, these Englishmen, they took it and they created their own nation. It was beautiful. People were prosperous. And the blacks came along later, by the way. So it was not founded by black people. The blacks came along later, and they prospered as well in the country because of the economic system, the political system. Everything was worked out in a way where everyone would benefit. Then, in the 1880 something to 1898 or whatever, 1899, there was the Boer Wars. The Boer means farmer in Dutch. I forget which language. But essentially, Cecil Rhodes, Englishman, globalist, wanted to undermine the people of South Africa. Because the British, as you know, they always for the longest time they would always try to stir stuff up, and everywhere in the world they could. Being the internal warmongers, the British have always been doing that for centuries. That's why they were able to get along so well with the Rothschild types. Of course, after World War II, they were undermined as well. So at the end of the day, be careful who you get in bed with. That's really the moral of that story. Anyway, so after the Boer Wars, the British pretty much took control of South Africa until 1950 or 60 something. I forget which year it was, when they were able to declare their independence because the British Empire was dead, and they couldn't maintain their hold on South Africa. So the Boers, they broke away, and so they started to prosper. The country started building itself up, and they literally became the most prosperous and powerful nation, but the best living standards in that region of the whole world. Then we get to Jimmy Carter. Right here. With Carter's support, the United Nations placed an arms embargo in South Africa, another first-rate African state built and run mainly by whites of Dutch ancestry. For the first time, anti-communist and independent South Africa began to be isolated by the quote-unquote international community. The pretext being, as usual, human rights. Human rights. We have to fight for our human rights. My name's Jimmy Carter, and I love my human rights. It would not be until 1994 that the besieged country fell again by election into the hands of the Marxist terrorist Nelson Mandela and his African National Congress gang. Crime-ridden South Africa's culture and economy have since deteriorated so much that even many blacks will openly admit that things were better for everybody under the old quote-unquote apartheid system. It was Carter who had begun the process of turning South Africa into a third world nation in which 10% of the white population now lives in squatter camps. And then here's a little bit right here. Rotten hell, Jimmy, and say hello to the Trilateral Commission masters who invented and promoted you, David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. So, yeah. The Nelson Mandela. First of all, let me ask, are you guys aware of Nelson Mandela?
I am.
Okay. Well, just for anyone who's not, I'll give a brief summary because we don't have much time. So Nelson Mandela was a terrorist who was responsible for murdering hundreds of people. His wife, by the way, was even worse. What's Winnie Mandela? She
Yeah.
was even worse. She was a mass murdering psychopath.
She was.
Yep.
Allegedly.
Oh yeah. And so this comes down to the whole thing of he was locked in jail for a couple decades because he was an open terrorist, not because he was a freedom fighter, that whole nonsense.
Political prisoner.
Oh yeah. And he was even told in prison all he had to do was just promise that he would renounce his communist ways and he would stop murdering people, and he said no. He literally all he had to do was just to get out of prison was just say that, and he said no. So in the 1990s, there was this big parade held and promoted and pushed with the head of it being George H.W. Bush, a so-called Republican, these rhino Republicans, I'm sure you're all aware. So he promoted Nelson Mandela, even had him at the White House. And Mandela, he was let out of prison because of. Now, this is similar to what happened with the LA riots in 1992, when they, because the media puffed up this dude so much and said that he was being oppressed and, that people were racist. They ended up having to let him go due to public pressure. He then, thanks to all the public pressure against South Africa, he was able to go over there and he became its leader. And let me bring up a really damn good picture about that I think will tell everything you need to know about Nelson Mandela. Let me bring up images because this is a damn good image.
Start tying it together, though, Taylor.
I know. I'm trying to. Here it is. Here it is, right here. Look at this. This man he's standing next to is Joe Slovo, head of the South African Communist Party, and look at the logo behind him.
Yeah.
Hammer and sickle. Now, to bring it all together back to the modern day, that being that the whole thing about Jimmy Carter's legacy is that one more thing I forgot to mention that I don't have time to get into just because we don't have much time, and this is probably his biggest crime: the Soviet Afghan War. When basically what happened was that Carter, through Brzezinski through Carter, was able to arm up the country of of Afghanistan. They were radicalizing people, letting criminals out of prison and arming them to the teeth. And the president of Afghanistan, he phoned Brezhnev, the leader of the Soviet Union, and said that, hey, you got it. Can you come in here and do something about this, because our country's going to be overwhelmed by all these CIA-backed terrorists. Brezhnev said that no, we can't do that, because if we go in, the whole international community is going to attack us. Or it's going to be a train wreck, because they're going to make us look like the aggressors. Finally, in 1979, at the end of 1979, actually, the coup became too strong, and so the Soviets had to go in, and then it laid the bear trap. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who would later brag, saying that he would do it again if he given the chance, he gave the Soviets their own Vietnam, and this was one of the key things that led to the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Now back to what I was saying before about leading all of this to the modern day. Carter's legacy, what it's done to the modern day. First of all, it turned Iran into basically a shithole, just for lack of a better word. Breeding terrorists, breeding radicals. It's one of the main hubs of these people in the Muslim world, as well as in places like Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, after, because of all the war that's been going on over there. So this has led to a lot to the migrant invasion that we see today. A lot of these radicals have been migrating over here to the West, bringing their ideology with them, raping women, killing children, etc., because they feel it's justified. That's Carter's legacy right there. He was the one responsible for that, or at least one of the key instigators.
And
Next,
yet he's one of the most forgettable ones.
he is, but he really shouldn't be, unfortunately,
Yeah.
because he was very damaging. Only one term, and I
Yeah.
didn't even get to everything because that would require more time. But he was very destructive, and
Taylor, you've done 4-hour shows and not been able to get through everything what these people are doing. That's what I'm saying. We're looking at Jimmy Carter, right? I'd take a step back and say, who's Jimmy Carter's handler? Because Jimmy Carter's not doing anything. He might as well be a peanut farmer. Ronald Reagan was an actor. It doesn't matter who we're looking at. It's the agenda, the Brzezinskis. Now he's a strategist, an economic hitman. He's taken that, like you said, it's on Vietnam. It ran out of money. That was the collapse. All of this was planned for this, because you were right. Everybody's arguing over who's going to control that one world thing. Stalin wanted it to be him. Hitler probably wanted it to be him. Churchill probably was told it was going to be whoever's handling him. So we've got all these factions, and that's where me and Alex bring these bloodlines into it, because you're joining all the mechanical bits for this. It's who's operating it. It's not even the wizard behind the curtain, because the wizard behind the curtain doesn't even know what he's doing. So that was a good presentation, that, mate. Very well done.
Thank you. It could have been better if I had brought up better slides, but unfortunately, I was a little pressed on time. I wasn't able to get enough.
Well, you can speak it though. That's the point. As long as we slow it down and break it into a few chunks that people can digest, then they can start to join these dots for themselves. Sometimes, like I said, if it's a tidal wave of information, they don't always get the, they don't bite. They get washed away with everything. So, do you want to? Obviously, we've got your details there in the description box. Do you want to say anything in wrapping up, pal?
Well, yeah. First of all, I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation, and also to check out the links that Webby's provided. It has my Rumble channel, my YouTube channel, which I want to upload on, but I'm afraid what to upload because YouTube. You know how it is. My Gmail is chimpyskippy@gmail.com, chimpyskippy@gmail.com. If you want to message me, just email that. And I also want to say, please support these good content creators, whether it's Webby or whether it's Mike King that I reference a lot, or a lot of the other people, because different people have different information. And it's just about sorting through the bad and getting to the good. And I don't mean to brag or anything, because I don't view myself as superior to anyone else. But after going through so many different people, I think I've been able to find the best sources. Just we'll just call it instinct. And in closing, I'll just say, anyone that likes what I do here, please like and subscribe to my Rumble channel, my YouTube channel, and all that good stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And thanks again, Webby, for having me on, and thank you for everyone in the chat for listening.
Thank you very much, Taylor. Now, God bless, sir.
God bless.
See you, Taylor.
Yep, God bless, Alex.
So, interesting conversation, interesting links with some of that stuff with Afghanistan and Jimmy Carter. As I said, he's possibly one of the more forgettable ones. There's been a few, but it's interesting, isn't it, how the forgettable ones seem to play those intrinsic links. Like John Major. straight from Thatcher, we had John Major, who was a grey who wanted more peas from his wife on his plate, and then we get Tony Blair that just is the catalyst for everything we've got now, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I'd frame all of this in, I suppose, in a certain way. I'd say, first of all, it's a big world with a big, long history. That means there's lots of data, and that means there's lots of different data entry points by which you can construct the story, by which you interpret the significance of everything. Because let's face it, people don't tell stories, particularly at this comprehensive scale. Even Taylor, even if he doesn't have a spiritual bone in his body, he talks about God. We don't know the degree to which it's nominal or not, but he does. But ultimately, it all comes back to when we have our big stories, when we tell our grand stories, when we tell our most meaningful stories, those are the ones by which we ground ourselves in life. So we have our personal investments, even when we tell our political stories and our other stories, because when we tell those stories about the world, it's the kind of world that we feel that we're either dislocated living in, that we want to put right, or we feel comfortable in. So there's a reciprocal relationship between us having our subjective experiences and our lives, like on a small scale, and the world out there. So you can't really separate the choices that we make to tell the story of the outer world from our inner conditions. So it's coming back like full circle to the Jungian stuff and other stuff, but it shows that narrative's all connected. We can't just say the story's out there. We can't just say the world's out there, because the story's in here. The world's also in here to a degree. So when we have, for example, if you look at the Green Party, just to shift it a little bit, when they first appeared, it was all single issue politics. It was a very narrow understanding of environmentalism. And same with Reform, when they just started off with UKIP and so on. It was all about migration, nothing else. But what you find over time is no matter how valid that single issue may or may not be, and in the case of the Greens, environmentalism's cool, climate change nonsense is a lie. So you can get politically and ideologically corrupted. But I think probably we'd agree that the more so-called right-wing agenda about migration was a correct and a relevant, starting point, and it's only become more so. That's why Reform have got so much backing, because of the boats, and we know that's being manipulated as well. We know there's an agenda behind all this. So we know there's a Russian doll effect, a story within a story. There's a level that we see it. Then we know there are operators behind the story, and they're telling us the main story, and they get it out on media. But we've got our own private stories, which may or may not resonate with those things, because you've still got the so what thing that I talked about. Well, yeah, so you got it right. So you're right about Carter. You were wrong about Carter. He's a big part in the plan. He's not. He's a minor character. He's a major character. It's still a big so what. But single variables as well as single issues in politics, when Trump was not in power, or should we say just before he got in power and served his first term, everyone was obsessed with the deep state, and he came in and he was going to put the deep state, right, he was going to route it, he was going to drain the swamp. And then people got cynical when he didn't drain the swamp. And others said, well, you can't just drain the swamp in such a short time. And then Taylor will say, well, the reason he did it strategically, the swamp almost had to invite itself to be drained. You almost want to con the people with the Epstein files so that they will beg for it to be released. And then Trump can pretend as if, somehow he's been incriminated, but really he isn't. When they beg for it to be released, then it gets released. There's nothing incriminating on Trump, but all these other people get incriminated. But it wasn't Trump that released it. He released it because it was demanded by the opponents who thought they were going to frame Trump. So you see all this double crossing and all this craftiness. And it is intriguing, if you're looking at it on a military level, if you look at it in terms of a strategy game, it's intriguing to analyse it on that level. But in terms of, when it was the deep state, it was the deep state. But suddenly when the deep state are no longer an issue, that single variable doesn't seem definitive anymore. Now it's the commander-in-chief and what he's doing. And is that single variable? And like you said at the beginning, when you push Taylor a little bit, it's a very coherent analysis that he does. And he's done a very good one there in that last piece of research.
Yes.
And all the stuff has got relevance. But like I said before, even if every fact that you name is true and all facts about the state of the world, what does it actually change? So we still come back to, inevitably, although it's better to understand what's going on, The book of Daniel says at the end, many will run around and acquire true knowledge and pass it on, and by that knowledge save many. So it is a good thing. But there's still a sense in which, in and of itself, it doesn't change much. It might help you to be more prepared and not as dumb and more aware. Then that can help be more aware. But really, the decisions that we need to make are at a different level, I think. Basically, what's going on, but a deeper level that we need to get to. And so for me, I'd say, yeah, there we go. Proof positive, but a really good contribution that Taylor made. But we've still got to say at the end of the day, and
what? Got to throw your arms out, mate. Got to throw your arms out. Going what? Well, this is the state of play that we're at. Like, if society's collapsing like it's being planned into, and people can only see that and the desperation, and then mixed in with all that, you have people who think that before all this bad stuff really happens, they'll be gone, but the bad stuff's happening in the rear, and everybody's going and telling everybody all this knowledge. People are waking up. People, it's how far do you go with it, Alex? It's one thing to understand that you shouldn't be paying some bills, but it's another thing to understand what the true worldwide agenda is, because all those characters that we've just all named, the presentation that Taylor did, they're all playing the game of one thing, which is this spiritual battle. So where do you go with that? If you can't give that knowledge to people, it's down to them. So they've got to have all the information. But if you stay within that Russian doll, then maybe you're not going to get all the information. There's stories, isn't there, where, like 45, 50 years after the war's finished, they find some bloke who's been hiding underground for 45 years, doesn't know the war's over. We've got all this shrapnel, we've got all this shredding that's gone on, all this fractured society that we thought was real, and then there's no spirituality on top. It's almost like you can see the frayed ends, the spirituality, many will fall away by thinking that they can save themselves, that they can still raise the vibrations and stuff like that. But what if? Because that all seems to be part of the same narrative, and that's the scary thing. I'm just glad we've been able to bring some of this stuff together. And like I said, as we're going now, I'd like to thank everybody in the chat room.
I have one more thing to say, though.
Oh, go on. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
No, it's just I wanted to, because I just wanted to appear like maybe I'm contradicting myself now. That point I kept doubling down on. If you knew all facts at the end of the day, and you had all the pieces together, and you had that perfect knowledge, it's so what? And it is. But the point to add here is, if you imagined all those facts as jigsaw pieces, and they all came together, and you did have all the pieces, then you'd see the picture. And we believe the picture behind every picture, when all the pieces are put together, whether it be from gas, water and electric, what Jimmy Carter was doing in line with, all the stuff that he was getting into with the globalists, whatever piece of data it is, whatever jigsaw piece it is, all the way through history, no matter what the occultists are doing, the bloodlines are doing, the politicos are doing, the journalists are doing, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, it's that story that we're trying to piece together with these jigsaw pieces, which in the end we believe, we're convicted, will reveal through all the shadows in there, all the reflections, all the silhouettes. When you look at them, when you look past them, you've got this picture. What is that picture? And we believe it's all pointing to the one thing, the one truth, which is the one way and which is the one life.
I think that's a good ending to that. Like I said, I'd like to thank everybody in the chat room, everybody who's listened live, who's not been involved in the chat room but listening anyway. people who are listening to this after, because we've been quite inundated with messages this week because of that video that's doing the rounds again. So there's been a lot of questions, a lot of answers, and hopefully because of that gas, water, and electric thing, it joins everybody. That at least joins everybody. Let's start just pulling at that thread. Where does that thread go? It goes straight through the court system, through the banking system, through everything. It takes us all through into the European stuff, into the wars. It's all the same stuff. They're all arguing who wants to fight and control it all. Yet all these characters that are fighting and arguing all agree under a certain set of laws, like Noahide laws. And even the Muslim Brotherhood that Taylor brought up, they even agree on it. They love communism. So this has been a thing that's been going on forever. And these Noahide laws unite all the man-made religions. They're all happy with it. The Catholics, the Muslims, the Protestants, Jews, they're all happy with it. The only people that are not happy with it are the Christians, who believe that Jesus, the only way, the truth, the life, was God in flesh. That is punishable by death under those laws. Christians are being genocided in Africa. Christians are being persecuted. I think there's a lot of signs around, boys and girls.
Yeah.
I think it's time. It really is time we start having this conversation. Thanks again, guys. It's been great. See you again next week.
Thank you, guys.
Night. God bless.
Bye.